You asking if this was going to be live on YouTube? I think I just made that happen by pressing a series of buttons. As usual, Jess is my co-pilot. She's actually the pilot. I don't know what I'm doing. So we basically didn't start with YouTube tonight because apparently my intro video keeps triggering YouTube and banning the stream or something. So because it's a good intro, so I don't want to lose it. So we're trying to sort of trick YouTube a little bit. Jess says I'm live on YouTube. So for all 7 of you that are over there, no, I actually heard that we've got, a little bit of a growing following over there. So yeah, we're live on YouTube. Okay, thanks to Mike Lindell. Thanks also to ourselves, and especially me, on this Easter holiday.
Every Easter, one brave bunny takes on a very important mission. Spreading Easter joy. And apparently dropping most of it. And sometimes there's goat-related complications. Skincare so good even the goats might want it. Because Easter is really about the greatest victory ever. Hope, renewal, and a promise kept. And every soft disclosure purchase supports 6 small American businesses working together. Use code GRACE for 15% off. Soft disclosure, good for your skin, and apparently approved by goats.
Sort of, I don't know, sort of nice, sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Charming, little bit disconcerting, right? When you watch that. Me too, I feel it too. Some uncanny valley going on. Some of the AI elements of that ad. But then, you find yourself thinking, well, if this wasn't AI, and if we actually filmed this, wouldn't that be more disconcerting? Given how strange that ad should make you feel, and how strangely compelled to purchase whatever we were selling with it, which I assume was soft disclosure products. Anyway, it's discombobulated me, it's disconcerted me. I hope you all feel just a little unsteady, psychologically, spiritually. Happy Easter to everybody. Baby Bright had a great time with his grandparents today, and he is keeping his mother awake well past his bedtime, so running her ragged. But we are thankful that he's feeling good this week, because a sick baby is not fun to deal with, but he is all good. Okay, before we get into sovereign disentanglement, little tiny intro section to get warmed up. We're going to talk a little bit about that concept of the divider in chief. This was a term coined by our own Chris Paul. I think he wrote this back in 2024. I could be wrong on the timing. But a little while ago, Chris wrote this feature on his Substack, imyourmoderator.substack.com, basically putting forth the argument that a few of us advance at Badlands, especially him, about this feedback loop and about the idea of reconciling the sort of not just the bicameral nature of Donald Trump, the communicator, but about what his intention actually is. And sometimes our reading of that puts us, as you guys are aware, puts us at odds with other people in the truth community, which is obviously not a monolith, right? It wasn't supposed to be a monolith. It's supposed to be a place, a decentralized collective is what I refer to it as, the truth community. But obviously there's people who we might call them trustees or plan trusters. I trust the plan. I just have a very different interpretation of what that is than a lot of people. And I think when he was referring to Trump as divider in chief, Chris can obviously go into much greater detail there. But what it makes me think of is basically that the friction we talk about, not just at Badlands, but in the InfoWar and within MAGA, is a core feature of the dialectic of Donald Trump, of the age of Trump. And we're probably this is a theme that I think is sneaking into basically every topic that we're going to talk about at GART Nashville, which is coming up in just a few days. Most of the topics that we've laid out have some relation to this. And if you're looking for the great why I think this is a good lead in to the sovereign disentanglement thing I want to talk about and Iran, because whatever you think is or isn't going on when it comes to the Iranian knot, and whatever you feel about Donald Trump, it shouldn't be controversial to state that the collective mindscape, nationally, internationally, Normieville, and truth community right now concerning Iran and Donald Trump and MAGA and the truth community is controversial, right? Not unified. Not to say that there isn't any, topics of unity or any sort of directions people are pushing in the same direction on, but it's divisive. It's a divisive time. And it used to just be a binary of like, do you trust Donald Trump and trust what he's doing or not? And obviously a lot of Normieville does not. A lot of MAGA and truthers by extension do trust what Donald Trump is doing. Most people are in this Badlands audience and in this show's audience because they probably do trust Trump and trust that he's part of something much bigger than most people are aware of, and they think we're crazy for thinking those things, right? It used to be that was the binary. Do you trust Trump? Do you think there's a larger plan at play? Or do you not? And we were on kind of one side or the other of that divide. There are more division points now to Chris's framing of the divider in chief. For example, people like me, like Chris, like John Harold in particular, we think to various degrees that Donald Trump is intentionally being divisive within his own base, within the MAGA base, within the truth community, and yes, even writ large across the battle space. Not just divisive in terms of he's owning the libs or the globalists, which we'll talk about quite a bit tonight, but that he is intentionally being bicameral, contradictory, escalatory on intervening narratives. Escalating and de-escalating is something that they're calling out directly lately. He's doing that, and people like me trust him because we think he's intentionally doing that. And yet, the reason that that's controversial to state, apparently, is that a lot of people think that when we question Donald Trump's narratives, we are not trusting Donald Trump. When my interpretation of Donald Trump is that he is intentionally putting forth divisive intra-MAGA narratives. He's putting forth narratives, he's chumming the water, and the net effect of this, you'd say, well, why would he do this? And a term that I kind of proposed to the other Badlanders in terms of being a real theme that's underlying this Gart-Nashville experience that's coming up is first principles. We talk about that a lot. I'm not going to do a whole show on that tonight, although it's related. I'll probably do a whole show on that next time, maybe. But we're going to talk about that in Nashville. And if you're looking for the why do we think Donald Trump would actively be dividing not just the American people, but even the MAGA core, and that division is accelerating heading into 2026, 2027. It's, to me, in a term, the answer is first principles. I believe that if there's a Patriot plan, a quote-unquote white hat plan, specifically from the framing of narrative warfare and fifth-generation warfare, and if that plan is good and something we would agree with, I think that the end state, the end goal, is not for the American people or the MAGA core to simply cheer for whichever MAGA character we are presented with. That might work temporarily in the age of Trump, but we've had this conversation, and this conversation will need to be had in increasing detail as the years go by. But Donald Trump isn't going to be there forever, right? I'm in favor of him being king, and I'm very unironic about that for a while. But even that's not permanent, right? So at some point, we're going to have to talk about, okay, let's say I take the trust the plan rhetoric out of the Q maximalists and the trust the plan rhetoric out of a lot of truthers to its maximum conclusions. Even those people are unable to answer the question of how far does that word trust extend beyond Donald Trump. Not just actually, in terms of right now, in the present tense, which people in Trump's orbit do you assign trust to based on their proximity to Donald Trump, either in the administration or in the story of the administration. Did you extend that trust to Pam Bondi? Now, the reason I ask that is because a few people at Badlands did not necessarily put all their faith in Pam Bondi. That doesn't mean she's not part of the plan. But I think the problem a lot of people have is when they say part of the plan, such and such, or who, Pam Bondi is part of the plan, let's say. Does she know she is? Can you be a part of the plan while not being a part of the plan? Do you have to knowingly be a part of the plan? And many people in this audience would say, you don't have to know. You could be used, you could be leveraged by the white hats. Okay, I agree with you. But certainly we don't then transfer trust in the plan to people who may be being used without their conscious knowledge by the plan, right? Is that controversial to state? Does the trust in Donald Trump and the Patriot plan transfer? Does it head hop? In the writing world, we would call this head hopping. Spotswool just said, what do you mean by the plan, BB? Exactly. That's a Socratic question and a good one. It shouldn't be a rhetorical question. It should be a Socratic question. I think that's what I'm getting at. We all have different interpretations of what the plan is. Unfortunately, I think it's unfortunate. The truth community has become decreasingly able to talk about that without freaking out. So if you say something like, yeah, I didn't think Pam Bondi was going to get to the bottom of the Epstein files, and if you said that a year ago, which some of us did, you were called a non-truster. You weren't trusting the plan. Okay, well, maybe we just didn't think the plan was for Pam Bondi to have anything to do with this, and by just honestly observing what she was doing in the narrative battle space, which was retarded, I can think people are acting retarded on purpose to expose things, to bring attention to things. I can also believe that certain characters are thrust into the center of the narrative, thrust into the spotlight by Donald Trump and quote-unquote patriots, because they know what the net effects of that is going to be. I use the term narrative shielding all the time. I also think that there is such a thing as human shields. We're talking about that kinetically in the context of war. But in an info war, I think there's also human shields, human narrative shields. Is it possible that Trump is deploying human narrative shields at certain points in time? People that they know their core audience are going to transfer all of this trust onto and, put them up on a pedestal as part of the plan. And then right when they get ousted, you get about half the truth community that says, obviously she's being promoted to like a super secret white hat position. That is, she's even more part of the plan now than she was before. That's what half the truth community thinks. The other half thinks, of course we knew Pam Bondi wasn't part of the plan. Like, obviously, we all saw this coming. She's going to be ushered off the stage and she never was read in on anything. Is that what you were saying 6 months ago? Come on now. Are we being honest? So, all of which is to say, the divider-in-chief narrative, I think, is important. And it serves a purpose, and that purpose is that it either sifts people out of the info war entirely, or it forces them, hopefully, to increasingly observe the battle space and attempt to apply first principles framing to these people, right? So rather than going in with a premise of Pam Bondi equals white hat, therefore I must blindly, exhaustively, and emotionally defend anything she says at all times and anything she does in Normieville, which makes you look retarded to normies. Not that you should care about them, but it does. Instead of operating on that basis, which is a faith-based basis to operate from, a principled basis to operate from is to say, I believe Donald Trump is forwarding a plan that I know the gist of or think I know the gist of, and I think that plan is good. I think it's sovereign coded. I think it's in line with the early Q drops. I think that we're heading into a great awakening and golden age, and I think Donald Trump will use people to fulfill that purpose in ways I can't necessarily guess at. I think that's a premise that you could earn an ability to look at the battle space with. And most of us in this audience have that mindset, right, generally. But to transfer that trust to the figures that are being thrust into the spotlight is a grave mistake. And that's just to talk about the current narrative, right? Now extend that by 5 years. Now extend it by 10 years. How about 15 years? For people who are trust maximalists, trust the plan maximalists, if we're 2 presidents beyond Donald Trump, and they're not Trumps, let's say, do we just indefinitely trust whoever the president is from now on? Because we assume that whatever plan we were looking at in 2026 is still the one that's winning or in power 15 years from now, right? These are the type of questions that you don't see being talked about on plan shows, on Trust the Plan shows, on Q shows. You don't see this kind of stuff being talked about. As I always say, I was a Q person, still consider myself a Q person, but I have a very different interpretation of what that whole op is than most of the Q community, 2026 Q community, I should say. We are not meant to transfer trust, in my view. Trust is earned, right? It's not a permanent state of affairs. How many truthers have you seen, and many of you have probably done this, retweeting or posting or boosting the famous Reagan speech of freedom not being passed through the bloodstream, right? It has to be defended with each successive generation. That is why people like me talk about the need to engage in the info war from a principled basis, even if you do have faith that there is a plan in the offing. And I believe that we're a big part of that plan. And I believe engaging in the info war, engaging in 5th gen warfare, understanding we don't have the same power projection capabilities as the quote unquote patriots, as the president, as the military, as the deep state, as the government institutions, as our local government probably. We do have a role to play in terms of the narrative, in terms of amplifying storylines, in terms of lending or removing our mandate, our belief, as Chris Paul would say, our consent. And I believe that's powerful energy. Collectively, it becomes even more powerful. So the Pam Bondi thing, I just think is an example of like, I don't know if she's read in on any kind of plan. I have my doubts about that. But, you know, those of us who were talking about any deployment Bondi was involved in kind of being humiliating to her and to segments of the truth community. Yeah, you're allowed to say Trump said nice things about her. Well, he said nice things about everybody that he's fired. Are they all part of the plan? Every single one of them is good, right? They might all be part of the plan. They might all be used in service of a plan. But I would argue that not all of them were read in on these things. And certainly not all of them are well-intentioned. And all you have to do is look into the background on a lot of these people. I mean, we have people in this community that have been talking about Robert Mueller being a secret white hat for 20 years, despite him basically being foundational to all of these second-order effects, first and second-order effects to come out of the Patriot Act era and the first Bush era. So he was just, you know, laying in wait as part of the plan all that time while helping to encode the modern police state onto the American mind and American legal system since 9/11. And, you know, when Donald Trump, it's funny how this works, right? The trustee sort of angle to everything. It's just anything Trump says just is the truth until you don't agree with it. And then you're allowed to just invert it, right? We've all played these games. So Pam Bondi is auto white hat, perma white hat, because Donald Trump said something nice about her after he fired her. And yes, he fired her. That is what he did. So he said something nice about her. Obviously, that means she's part of the plan, right? So when he says something really nasty about Robert Mueller after he dies, for the people that think he was a secret white hat, do you take Trump at face value when he says that horrible thing about Robert Mueller? Or, oh, you don't do it then, right? Then it's kayfabe. And the way kayfabe works is it just maps onto whichever reading you want to apply. And I have mapped kayfabe, right? Again, part of the principal's approach here is to say that none of us know what's going on here. But it's about being honest about our processes and being consistent about our processes that we're applying to this stuff. And I just thought the divider in chief thing was especially relevant right now. I think the Iran, I called it the Kobayashi Maru, the impossible task. I called it that in 2025. Did not see it escalating narratively to this point, but I am enjoying it. I think it's fantastic. I think Donald Trump is engaged in the most complex military operations of all time. And I think that this is one of them. This might be his crowning achievement when all is said and done. And I wrote something back in 2022 that I brought up before. I'm going to bring up my writings on these solo shows called The Wolves Among Us. I wrote this in November 2022 before the last midterm cycle. And the entire premise to this was that a lot of people in 2022 were shaming people like me, people like John, people like Chris Paul. We're talking about how unity in the truth community and in the MAGA core was fake and was dangerous. Because when we were questioning the intentions behind the DeSantis op, not just DeSantis himself, but more importantly, the intentions of the narrative ciphers, the narrative amplifiers out there, the social media grifters with huge followings that were boosting the DeSantis campaign, I said in that article, commit their names and faces to memory. These were all the same people. If you guys remember, go back down memory lane to November 2022 when Donald Trump announced his candidacy for 2024, quote unquote, too early. That was the narrative, right? Trump announced his candidacy for president too early in 2022. Now, you may think that CNN said it was too early, or the left said it was too early. The left that we defeated, but that's become the enemy again, right? In 2026, we're going to just keep beating those Democrats. That's what the awakening was all about. 2022, it was not the liberals saying that. It was fake MAGA. It was all these social media whores who got on board, and some of whom were paid, quite literally, by the DeSantis campaign and those behind it. They said Donald Trump was, what was he doing, guys? Disrupting unity. He was disrupting unity by announcing his candidacy for president. That narrative only had a foundation in some segments of the collective mind because those people believe Donald Trump lost an election in 2020, and therefore that Donald Trump had lost the public mandate. He had lost the mandate of the MAGA core. And so Ron DeSantis was the prince, the ascendant prince. And Ron DeSantis was set to announce his candidacy for president. Perhaps later that month, after some bad things happened in the midterms, we're told on TV. The Democrats were taking seats. Right? So some of us just said, no, Donald Trump is the movement and is our chosen cipher. He's the tribune of the people. And he's who we're backing. Turns out, when I said commit those faces and names to memory of all those people who were amplifying the DeSantis campaign and de-amplifying the Trump campaign, DeSantis announced his candidacy after Donald Trump. The reason that they were so pissed off, and the reason, in my estimation, that Donald Trump announced his candidacy, quote unquote, too early, according to the MAGA mind, was to front run the DeSantis op. Because obviously the plan was for DeSantis to announce his candidacy early and for Donald Trump to be seen as following him and disrupting the unity that would have coalesced, the illusion of unity that would have coalesced around Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis was meant to pull in all the gravitational energy, the mass psychological energy of the MAGA core. He was supposed to be the new ascendant version of the MAGA core. A lot of you Floridians pushed that shit real hard. Took the cheese on that a bit. And when Donald Trump undercut him and announced his candidacy early, that was an example to me of narrative disarmament. He disarmed the DeSantis campaign. He also exposed the Candace Owens of the world, etc., on and on. She might not have them. Don't worry about that part of it. Don't worry about the specifics. But you guys know the Daily Wire crowd and all of that at the time. They said Trump was disrupting the movement. Trump was disrupting the movement that he had created, right? Because it turns out those people never believed in the MAGA movement. They believed in the Republican movement, the GOP movement, which is not the Donald Trump movement. And as a liberal, as a former liberal, I can tell you that. Chris Paul is a former liberal. He can tell you that. The Donald Trump movement is not the Republican movement. And those of you who are trying to remake it into a Republican movement have totally missed the point, in my view. So, long intro there. The point of that is that Donald Trump, in my view, and in the view of a few of my peers, is intentionally causing this friction within MAGA, just like he did in 2022. And all those people are going to get right back on board the Trump train right after he navigates this Kobayashi Maru and say, we knew he was going to do it, right? Same people are going to freak out on Tuesday, whatever happens on Tuesday with this deadline. And, the foundational premise to me, which is a big theme of tonight's episode, premises matter a lot. And for those of you who get upset when we question when things are real or fake, and I know that this audience is like the highest percentage of people who do question whether or not things are real or fake. I would say that assuming things are real, assuming what you're being told by any and all sides in the info war is real, is a much more risky proposition and puts you on much shakier ground. The escalation and de-escalation out of Iran. If every single thing comes out, you react to as if it is a direct one-for-one translation of facts on the ground, facts in the realm of the real, then I would say you are liable to get emotional and to rush to judgment, and you'll end up backtracking. If you just observe them as stories, it doesn't mean you're saying there's nothing going on and no war is being fought. More in my estimation, it means you're saying that you're able to then map where the narrative's trying to take you. And that is the point to me. So I like the sifting. I think it's good. I said on some shows recently, some of you guys might have heard me say this, but the slings and arrows refrain, many of us are familiar with. I first saw it in the Q drops, I think. No. Well, it was in the Q drops, but Donald Trump said that years ago, right? His first campaign. I take these slings and arrows gladly for you. And a lot of us at the time were like, oh, it's the slings and arrows of the liberal media and the mainstream media. Certainly I thought that at the time. And maybe that is true. Multiple meanings exist, right? Now, though, looking at the current battle space and the slings and arrows that Trump is taking from people who ostensibly understood his genius the last 10 years, I think those might be the slings and arrows that are tougher for him to take. Not the grifters, not the people that I'm sure they know who's legit and who's not, who's earnest and who's not, but more the people who actually are reacting to current events as if they're happening, as we're being told about them, and think like, man, Trump did run on no new forever wars, and now he's in Iran, right? And I think tough slings and arrows for Trump to take would be earnest followers of his reacting to the news as if it's real and thinking, that's not what I wanted. It's not what I wanted my guy to do. Well, maybe he's not doing that kind of stuff. So, how do we then question Donald Trump? And how do we cheer for the story of a war while looking for peace? That is the point of this presentation on sovereign disentanglement. And as a little setup for that, for just not taking everything at face value, first of all, I'm going to hit everybody with a little Trump statement from not too long ago. I think this was from this morning. This is just a selfish thing. Tuesday will be Power Plant Day and Bridge Day, all wrapped up in one in Iran. There'll be nothing like it. And this is the key. Open the fucking straight, you crazy bastards, or you'll be living in hell. Just watch Praise Be to Allah, President Donald J. Trump. So he's a mad lad. And I think that that message is funny for a few reasons. First of all, there are still, I think most of them have screwed out of the audience, but there are still a few people every now and again that will be like, can you please not swear? And to them I say, open the fucking straight, you crazy bastards. This is one of my favorite things about Donald Trump, just as a personal aesthetic, that he crashed through that neoconservative, faux Southern gentleman dialectic that had become of insufferable modern conservatism. It was turning off a generation of young men, and I know this because I am one, was one, back at that time. It's like the stuffy conservatives at their golf clubs and their soirees and their fundraisers. Meanwhile, they're voting for the military-industrial complex every time it comes around, calling us all communists. Now, we were retarded communists, obviously, so that was deserving. But one of the early things that MAGA was mad at before it was MAGA was Donald Trump's language. How uncouth he was, how ungentlemanly, how unbecoming of the Republican Party, which, need I remind you, Donald Trump was not a Republican when he was younger. He was an East Coast, shit-eating wild man of a Democrat. And he still is an East Coast shit-eating wild man. And I like seeing it come out every now and again, right? The infamous clip from, was it 2025? They don't know what the fuck they're doing. And then he says, open the fucking straight, you crazy bastards. On Easter, no less. On Easter Sunday, he says this. Does this man have no respect? Does he not care about Jesus? A lot of people have to think about whether or not grown adults are allowed to swear these days. Anyway, that's just a personal point. But Trump obviously threatening Iran. This has to do with the curious case of intermittent escalation and de-escalation that I've been talking about on multiple fronts for quite a long time. The big story that will be irrelevant by the time many of you watch this on Monday is the rerun of Behind Enemy Lines. A very bad movie from the early 2000s. And I was saying in the Badlands chat earlier, you know, if your premise is that all this stuff is definitely 100% real and that is just how Donald Trump engages in open warfare, just swearing at other countries and threatening to bomb them into oblivion if they don't comply with his demands, it's possible that that's real. But if you think that that's all real, then I think maybe extend a little bit of grace, especially on this week, to Normieville, who are like, that's not what he said he was going to do. So is there another way to interpret the constant plagiarism of these infamous Hollywood military movies? Chris Paul talked at length in 2025 about how uncanny the resemblance of the plot structure of Operation Midnight Hammer was to Top Gun Maverick. We had a trench run through the mountains. We had one chance to shoot this missile that nobody saw down this shaft that nobody knew was there, to hit this target that nobody thought could get hit, and thank God we did, right? The Israelis didn't believe us. NATO didn't believe us. Europe didn't believe us. Most of the military didn't believe us. But Donald Trump swore that that is what happened, and we all just accepted it. And he disarmed a nuclear war narrative there. Turns out, apparently, it needed more disarmament, which is the whole theme of tonight's show. But you know, I think maybe if you're willing to go out on the ledge and think things are not necessarily all that they appear, the movie script sort of stuff might lend some credence to that idea. We got him, Trump says, as second down pilot recovered in high-risk Iran Special Forces raid after a dicey firefight. He put out this big Truth Social post. Brave warrior was behind enemy lines in the treacherous mountains of Iran, being hunted down by our enemies who were getting closer and closer by the hour. He was never truly alone. Guys, come here. Guys, do you think that happened? Do you think that happened? Do you think this happened? Do you think it happened as Donald Trump is saying it here? We got him. He was being hunted in the mountains. The enemy was getting closer and closer. The savages, Trump called them. The reasonable savages, of course. Was it Friday that he called them very reasonable? It was Friday, right? That he called them very reasonable compared to the last regime, and that he's pretty sure there's a framework of peace in place. But, sorry, that was Friday. I mean, it was Sunday that they became savages hunting this man through the mountains. They were getting closer and closer by the hour, but your commander-in-chief was there. The Secretary of War, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and fellow warfighters were monitoring his location 24 hours a day and diligently planning for his rescue. At my direction, the U.S. military sent dozens of aircraft armed with the most lethal weapons in the world to retrieve him. He sustained injuries, but will be just fine. This miraculous search and rescue operation comes in addition to a successful rescue of another buried pilot yesterday, which we did not confirm because we did not want to jeopardize our second rescue operation. This is the first time in military memory that 2 U.S. pilots have been rescued separately, deep in enemy territory, except Donald Trump. You are lying. Because that is the plot of the good call, Kairos, in the chat. You spoiled it ahead of time. That is the plot of 2 films wrapped into one. Behind Enemy Lines in 2001 and Lone Survivor. This is a fusion of those 2 movie plot scripts. If you plugged this Truth Social post into AI and you ask it, what movie plot is Donald Trump referencing here? He is referencing Behind Enemy Lines and Lone Survivor. We will never leave an American warfighter behind. The fact that we were able to pull off these operations without a single American killed or even wounded just proves once again that we have achieved overwhelming air dominance and superiority over the Americans, over the Iranian skies. It's incredible. Incredible stuff. I'm looking forward to the movie. I am sure, and you know there will be several movies, right? And have you guys ever looked into the operators who are lionized in many of these infamous movies that many people in conservative world love? You ever looked into any of those guys real closely? Kind of find a few years after the movie comes out, maybe some guys they served with are like, that didn't really happen that way at all. So we'll keep our eyes on that. I think maybe they've already optioned the script for this. We can watch. I think Behind Enemy Lines is Korea, right? This was Oh, you know what's also funny? I think the spoiler for Behind Enemy Lines is also relevant because the whole background of that terrible movie plot was a disagreement with NATO. So it was the synopsis was U.S. Navy helicopter pilot Chris Burnett is part of the NATO force observing the peace treaty during the conflict in former Yugoslavia. Bored with routine duties, he flies off his designated routes and spots Serb forces breaching the peace agreement, but they spot him too and down his craft. Now, that is kind of a dark synopsis, given if you go down the Serbian rabbit holes and what NATO was doing to those people. So this was one of those Hollywood propaganda pieces that was selling you on NATO being the good guys, when really Serbian freedom fighters were like fighting against NATO.
What is it? Holy shit, we're being painted! What? Shit, they fired! Scoop it now! Copy! Pull up! Get the nose moving! Roger! I see a single missile tracking on us. I don't see it. Call my turn. No, slice left. Hard! Jesus Christ. Where is it? Right. Try to break the lock. Golden Eagle Archangel, we have been been engaged!
Roger. Laser 1-1. You want quantity 2?
Put out decoys, Blair! Copy. Hang on! Where is it? Goddammit! Where is it?
All right, you get the point. You get the point. Don't want to get sucked into, man, 80s, I mean not 80s, early 2000s movie editing. Holy shit. It was bad. But, hey, that's pretty much what happened. What we're told happened, and definitely for sure did, because it will hurt some people's feelings if you say it definitely didn't happen. So anyway, we can move on from that. But all of that is to say, I can think something like that is a little over the top, and the missing pilots were a little over the top, and the lone survivor fusion with behind enemy lines is a little over the top, while also being absolutely delighted at the narrative deployments of Donald Trump. And ultimately, it doesn't really matter if you think it's all happening as we're being told it's happening or not. The point is, what is the story or the actual trying to accomplish? And that gets us into sovereign disentanglement. This is a template. I often refer to these as cognitive ciphers. This is the one that's most relevant that I've been using in 2025 and 2026. Really started talking about it during Operation Midnight Hammer, which was the Top Gun Maverick situation. Real Mrs. Bright in the chat. Get out of here. Go to bed. Go to bed like your son so peacefully and without fight went to bed a little while ago. Operation Midnight Hammer, I started using the sovereign disentanglement term, and Operation Absolute Resolve, which was with Venezuela, it definitely cemented that to me. And in fact, in that article, I said something. I said something to that effect. I have so many tabs open that this is just going to be difficult. January. Speaking of templates, the InfoWar is picking up on one having been set for Iran as well. First Venezuela, next Iran, Burning Bright says. And yes, I do pronounce it differently every time I say it. It's brutal. Another hotbed of regime ops that is currently in the midst of its own color revolution. Many, even in the otherwise discerning audience, have fallen for. Is Trump going to spirit away Khomeini, only to leave the rest of his ruling party in control, while rug pulling the global regime's planned version of the change event? And is he going to grant Khomeini the same sort of photo opportunities as Maduro? Dark Knight Illusions and all? I don't think we're going to get the photo ops. But anyway, now that sounds like a toot your own horn, and it is. Most of these things are. But there's a method to the madness. I don't think I'm a genius because I said Iran was next. I think I took Donald Trump at face value when he said what his macro goals were. I think this is a war between the Sovereign Alliance and the invisible enemy, aka the globalists. And I think these proxy theaters need to be inverted, disarmed, disentangled in order to get us to a multipolar world. I think this is a multipolar war to get us into a multipolar future, a golden age, etc. Not just in the US, but worldwide. And the reason I really wrote that article, Sovereign Disentanglement, back in January, was I had put together a template in 2025 by observing the Operation Midnight Hammer narrative. Right? It kind of happened of a sudden. We were told about it all of a sudden. So I retroactively mapped that, built a template out of that operation, believing personally that it was largely narrative, but that narrative of Operation Midnight Hammer had actual far-reaching effects that were good. Namely, the illusion or belief of nuclear disarmament, that Iran was being disarmed as a nuclear power. Why is that a good thing? As I said in 2025, because if Israel and the Western hegemon can't credibly assert that Iran is a nuclear regime threat, then they lose the impetus and the mandate for war because they have lost the story for that war. They've lost the story that gets them into that war. They've lost any credible on-ramp to get to that war. So as I said in 2025, I believe we were watching the illusion of an on-ramp to war by Donald Trump, which was actually disarming an on-ramp and creating, de facto, an off-ramp to war. Obviously, Iran had to keep going. So when I saw some of these markers going off with the Venezuela narrative before we went in there, and a lot of this was Ghost, talking about the history of Venezuela, talking about some of the stuff that was going on down there, I started saying, this looks a lot like Operation Midnight Hammer. And then, as I was tracking the Venezuela narrative, Absolute Resolve, I projected what would this look like in Iran if the same playbook, if the sovereign disentanglement playbook, the narrative disarmament playbook, was applied to Iran, what would it look like? And the broad strokes have been identical. Perfect matches, right? You're never going to get the figures right. You're never going to get the specifics right. But on the macro, the pattern has been exactly what the Venezuela template was. And as I said on the narrative a few weeks ago and on DPH, they were telling you, Donald Trump is telling you, he's telling the New York Times, probably with a shit-eating grin, that he's following the Venezuela model, the Venezuela template. Well, what is the Venezuela template? It's the discombobulator. It's sovereign disentanglement. That's obviously just a term I've applied to it. And before I get into the details of what sovereign disentanglement is, it's worth noting what we're disentangling. I believe sovereign disentanglement is all about disentangling on-ramps to forever wars. This is the Iranian knot, the Kobayashi Maru, that I believe Donald Trump is disentangling here. He is removing all possible on-ramps to a future forever war with Iran under the illusion of granting or taking those on-ramps. I think this is why Scott Bessent, who I'll talk about later if I have time, is the poster child of signal within the noise. He's the one who kind of tells you what's actually going on while Donald Trump does his bicameral thing and issues contradictory statements. Scott Bessent last week said sometimes you have to escalate to de-escalate. Sometimes you have to escalate to de-escalate, right? That's inversion, in my view. That's disarmament. Sometimes you have to look like you're getting into a forever war in order to what? Avoid a forever war. That is what I think is going on here. Sometimes you have to pretend to get into a nuclear standoff to disarm a future nuclear standoff. I think these will happen in multiple theaters. So, first Venezuela, next Iran. Don't think it's going to be last, but I think it's currently up. Sovereign disentanglement. To jump ahead, how's that Venezuela disentanglement going? U.S. Embassy in Caracas resumes operations. It's going to be relevant in our discussion. The U.S. Embassy in Caracas formally resumed operations on Monday, marking a major step in the Trump admin's effort to advance Venezuela's economic recovery and eventual political transition. A State Department memo said the reopening will strengthen our ability to engage directly with Venezuela's interim government, like an interim champion, civil society, and the private sector. State Department spokesman Tommy Pigott said the move represents a key milestone in implementing the administration's three-phase plan for Venezuela, which outlines stabilization, economic recovery, and political reconciliation. All of which is important, and all of which I would encode into the sovereign disentanglement or narrative disarmament playbook. And one of the early premises, I think, or patterns that I think you can take away from these things and build some confidence here is if it's all so real, right? As a lot of people are all of a sudden in the InfoWars saying everything we're looking at is real, despite calling most things fake for the last 10 years. Suddenly it's all real. How then are the people calling it fake able to predict the on-ramps and the off-ramps of these situations and the end states of the situations? Because the people that thought the discombobulator in Venezuela was very literal and kinetic thought that there was going to be a lot more chaos coming out of that theater. While those of us who thought we were watching a narrative disarmament situation and a reconciliation situation, a sovereign disentanglement situation, thought that we'd have stability way faster than it should be possible to have stability. And now we're already in this phase of reconciliation. If you're looking for order of operations too, isn't it something that I'd say the key macro narrative coming out of the Iranian knot is the energy situation, right? The global energy situation, which I wrote about at length last week. Well, isn't it something that we've now got this stable Venezuela in the Western Hemisphere, which is one of the energy capitals of the world. And Trump says the oil's flowing. It's already flowing just a few weeks later. Wasn't that good? And obviously the U.S. has its own oil reserves. I've talked about that on other episodes. It's not meant to be the main topic tonight. But I think there's this confidence boost here. When you can kind of see these things coming in advance, you can build templates around those things. And that's what I attempted to do. And another little cipher. This isn't really a cipher. This is just something that I think is good to keep in mind. I hear one of these two terms talked about frequently, but not the other one. Most of you guys have probably heard of the term deductive reasoning, right? Have you heard of inductive reasoning? I would argue that there is a place for both. There is a time and a place for both. But my argument is that deductive reasoning is how most people think. I call those people system thinkers. I also think it's a problem. Inductive reasoning ironically leads many people into this stuff. I would guess that if we could take some sort of test on these things, all people are capable of deductive and inductive reasoning. My guess is that many of the people watching this show, many of you, are inductive reasoners. And I think it's better to be an inductive reasoner who then uses deductive reasoning than the opposite. I was talking to Mrs. Bright about this in the car earlier today. She was teaching me all about inductive reasoning, calling doctors retards after our experiences over the last couple of weeks. So I'm just plagiarizing Mrs. Bright's presentation from earlier. So let's get a few cliff notes here, because this is important for the sovereign disentanglement playbook. What is deductive reasoning? Deductive reasoning, also known as top-down reasoning, moves from general premises to specific certain conclusions. The process: theory, hypothesis, observation, confirmation. That is deductive reasoning. That is most human reasoning. I have a theory. I observe the world with that theory in mind. I map things onto that theory or premise that I already hold. I deduce or conclude that my theory is either intact or it's been destroyed based on those observations. Now, the vast majority of people don't do the last part, right? If something contradicts their theory, they just change how they view the observation. That's where cognitive dissonance comes in, right? You get cognitive dissonance when you are not able to change the premise that results in the deduction. So that's deductive reasoning. The reason I think that's indicative of a systemic mind, a system-oriented thinker, is because system thinkers move through the world with premise after premise after premise locked in their mind, right? What's an easy example of this? Look at the COVID scamdemic, pandemic, whatever you think it was. It was nothing. Spoiler alert. It was nothing. You're fucking retarded if you think it was something. But there's some of you that are retarded. So that's okay. It's not. But for the purposes of me not getting mad at you, I assume I will allow it to be okay for this hypothetical. A deductive reasoner would say, the experts say there is a very deadly pandemic. If there was a very deadly pandemic, I would expect world governments to behave as if there was a very deadly pandemic. If world governments acted as if there was a very deadly pandemic, I would expect my neighbors and all of society to act as if there was a very deadly pandemic. Once I've seen and observed all of those things happening in a logical framework, in a logical cascade, I deduce, well, look at that. There must be a very deadly pandemic. That's deductive reasoning. And this is why I often say a very logical person can be entirely wrong. And frequently, they are entirely wrong if they are operating from a faulty premise. If your premise was that there was a very deadly pandemic, the behavior of the world around you during 2020 would confirm that faulty premise. But if the very deadly pandemic was a psyop, your premise was false, but the observations based on that premise were entirely accurate. Which is why I often say, in a manner of speaking, there was a very deadly pandemic because the world operated as if there was one. That's deductive reasoning. That's a system thinker. I'm going to come back to deductive reasoning because there's a time and a place for it. What's an inductive reasoner? It's the opposite, right? Deductive is a top-down reasoner. Inductive is a bottom-up reasoner. Inductive reasoning moves from specific observations to broader generalizations, aiming for probable conclusions. So the dialectic for inductive, observations, patterns, tentative hypotheses, general theory. The goal is to create new theories or generalizations based on observations. Conclusions are probable, not guaranteed. They can be considered strong or weak. Here's examples of both. Deductive. All men are mortal. That's the premise. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is immortal. Logical progression. The premise is probably pretty safe there. Makes sense. Inductive. Every dog I've met at the park has been friendly. Therefore, all dogs at the park are friendly. This is a tell in this little Google AI summary that the system represented by Google and AI does not like inductive reasoning. Because note that the examples that they provide for inductive and deductive reasoning, the deductive example is correct. The inductive example is not correct. Inductive reasoning can get you into trouble because you can observe a friendly dog in their scenario. You can then assume all dogs must be friendly. You start with an observation, you build a premise off that observation. It's an inversion. That can get you into trouble, which is why you have to be careful with inductive reasoning. This is why we talk about mapping. Whatever maps onto reality. Chris Paul thinks this way. Inductive reasoner, I would suggest. Thanks, Indie Boy. I don't like you, but thanks for the 12 subscriptions to Badlands. Although you gave one to Mrs. Bright. Appreciate that. Deductive reasoning, however, I think is a bigger problem. People observing reality around them and then building frameworks of thought based on what they're observing, I think has a much greater positive impact and gets you into less trouble than people who walk around with premises centralized and cemented in their minds and then attempts to map reality onto those premises, because that's where you get confirmation bias, which is Mrs. Bright said that earlier. And that leads you into fake scamdemics and plandemics and all the rest of it. Can you have both? Can you do both? I would suggest that you can. The reason that I like to build cognitive ciphers is because I believe in inductive reasoning, observing the battle space, observing the info war, and then seeing if you can spot patterns in what you're seeing. And if you can spot those patterns reliably, you can start to build a framework, a template, a premise. I call these ciphers. The reason I don't use the term premise all that often is because from an inductive reasoning perspective, a cognitive cipher I don't think of as a premise. I think of it as a movable framework, a generalized framework, like a cipher, that can be applied to different situations. They're not exact. It's not really a template, even though we use that word. A template involves stasis, rigidity, sameness, right, across different situations. And I don't think that's how reality works. I don't think that's how the info war works. I think there are commonalities, but I do not believe there's one-to-one translations. So if you're building cognitive ciphers based on patterns you have observed, inductive reasoners tend to be very good at pattern recognition. Many of you probably got into this stuff because you're very good at pattern recognition. Some people maybe came into it because they just like Trump, or somebody told them about the Q drops, but the Q drops were laying out patterns. The benefit of a cognitive cipher is that you can apply it to multiple situations. You can adjust it, you can pull things out of it, you can see what does map, what doesn't map. The good thing about it is if something doesn't map, it doesn't undo the usefulness of the cipher. Now, if that cipher never maps onto the battle space, you might as well discard it, right? Because it's not really a useful tool if it's not mapping onto anything. But there are some that you guys have seen us use, come up with, that we kind of, they map over and over again. The Our Boy template, that's a cipher. Our Boy Blue, Our Boy Zelensky, Our Boy Mom, Our Boy Maduro. He's not really an Our Boy, he's a sovereign bro, but there's a subtle difference. We went over that on a different episode of the narrative. The ciphers can be very useful. But I do believe that with these ciphers, you can start to build foundational premises, right? Many people that were introduced to the Q drops, it introduced this idea that the drops themselves, in my view, collectively represented a cipher, an info cipher that could be applied, mapped, build the map, build the cipher, apply the cipher to the InfoWar battle space. And in so doing, you can start to codify certain observations into patterns. You can build those patterns or combine those patterns into premises. One such premise might be Donald Trump is part of something much larger than a political movement. There is a patriot plan that is rooted in clandestine military intelligence networks, right? We are in the midst of a fifth generation war for control of the collective mind in order to alternatively control or free the American mind. Those are premises. And if you start with those premises, I think you can get into trouble, because that's what I started the show with. I think you can be liable to look at anything on the battle space related to those premises and think Pam Bondi in the Trump administration must be part of the plan, must be a secret white hat. That's deductive. Inductive, I think you could still have built those premises, but understanding that you don't map everything onto those premises. You only add onto those premises or map onto those ciphers what maps cleanly. So if you're looking at Pam Bondi and you're like, she's doing a lot of stupid shit, she's probably being used for some angle that I'm not aware of, but she doesn't appear to be mapping onto the premise of a secret white hat. She doesn't need to. That would be an inductive pathway. All of which is to say that sovereign disentanglement is a template I have built, or a cognitive cipher I have built for my own mind, that I have been applying inductively to the battle space. I am not assuming it on the battle space. I've built a cipher, and I then map it onto the battle space to see if it fits. And the order of events is important here. How I started building the sovereign disentanglement cipher was based on one pattern that I initially recognized, and I'm not the only one who recognized this. Chris Paul's been talking about this for a long time. Ghost has been talking about this for a long time. The core beginning, to me, of the sovereign disentanglement cipher is the idea of a color revolution, or the story of a color revolution. So, not all color revolutions are going to map onto the sovereign disentanglement cipher, but if we are told about a color revolution or an uprising, a sovereign uprising, my mind immediately snaps to sovereign disentanglement. Let me see what happens from now forward. Before we get to Iran, what were we told was going on in Venezuela? Color revolution, right? Well, we're not told it's a color revolution, but we're told there's an uprising against the Maduro regime for several years. If you guys watch Ghost at all, he's been talking about this for a long time. Okay, the people are rising up against a regime, right? How many times have we heard that story? So you should probably be a little suspicious of that premise right off the bat. But either way, you want to map it forward, map it against either premise, go bicameral with it. You look into the color revolution, or you look into the organic uprising. I'm Freudian slipping a lot. Look into the uprising against the Maduro regime. Who is the figurehead of the uprising? That would be the second pattern to map. The figurehead, in the case of Venezuela, is usually a populist, right? Except kind of a fake populist. Usually a globalist. Usually has some backing by non-governmental organizations, NGOs. Usually is backed by US intel. So Hakuna Matata, Maria Corina Machado, she fit that template. We're told there's an uprising in Venezuela against the Maduro regime. We're told the Maduro regime is very evil and bad. We look to the figurehead that this organic uprising among the people is holding up as their paragon, and we find that she is funded by the World Economic Forum, or she's affiliated with the World Economic Forum. She is given a Nobel Peace Prize. She is funded directly by the National Endowment for Democracy, all NGOs, by the way, that Donald Trump has been trying to dismantle, effectively in some cases. She has taken funding from USAID. Her organizations have. Campaigns she's been involved with have taken money from USAID. And then you look into her history in Venezuela, and in between stints of standing up to the Maduro regime and trying to position herself as the voice of the people in Venezuela, she is running a non-governmental organization involved in defending democracy and voting, right? So that is one template there. What happened at the end of the Venezuela operation, we're already seeing renormalization. As Ghost predicted in detail in advance, the new Maduro regime would look very similar to the old Maduro regime. Delcy Rodriguez comes in, Maduro's second in command, the entire cabinet essentially stays in place. So effectively, and Trump has kind of said this tongue-in-cheek in my view, in the months since, the new Venezuela regime is essentially the old Venezuela regime. And we've got sovereign disentanglement. And how did it start? A color revolution, or the appearance of an organic uprising, a populist figurehead funded by globalist organizations. Another marker, is that the ousted regime is sovereign alliance coded. The Maduro regime was very friendly with sovereign alliance nations and leaders such as Vladimir Putin in Russia and Xi Jinping in China. One of the things that drives me the most crazy in the truth community is the degree to which truthers and Q people talk about the plan to combat the globalist deep state by Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, and Xi Jinping. And then in the same breath, they're like, man, Trump is really sticking it to Russia and China, right? Total contradiction. Doesn't work. That's cognitive dissonance as a result of deductive reasoning. It's not inductive. It's not logical. It doesn't map. So let's show you, if you guys want to save this, you obviously can. If you find any use from it, I don't know if you will or not. It's kind of autistic. Sovereign disentanglement. Who is it for? Sovereign alliance. Who is it against? The invisible enemy. There are 6 stages to sovereign disentanglement that I'm going to go over. I'll quickly run through them now. Stage 1, draft and develop. Also known as nice story you got there. Phase 2, block and intercept. Counter coups, the reverse Uno card. Phase 3, invert. Hot swaps and burn cards. These are some of the terms I use. Phase 4, stabilize and recover. This is something that was referenced in that Venezuela article I just showed you. This was out of the Trump State Department. Stabilization and economic recovery. Phase 5, translate. This is my specialty. Political reconciliation. This was a term taken straight from the State Department out of the Trump administration. And phase 6, scale and converge. I call this sovereign radiation. Just to be clear, sovereign disentanglement is something I thought of, and this is how I would define it. This is not some like manual that I'm attempting to program people with. It is just something I think about. So, going back to the first marker, how is the Venezuela template similar to the Iranian template? We're only midway through Iran right now, so we'll see if the rest of this maps. This is part of why I wanted to do the show, to basically put this out there, see if you guys have any spins on it, but basically see if you want to mark this down, see if you can guess which phase we're in, and see if, broadly speaking, this template applies, or this cipher applies cleanly to Iran as the story continues. We're not done with it yet. So it'd probably be most useful to quickly run through Venezuela through the lens of sovereign disentanglement, since Venezuela inspired me to create this cipher or refine this cipher. Okay, so phase 1, draft and develop. Nice story you got there. What are the steps of phase 1? I don't know if this is going to be too dry for people, but hey, it's an experimental show. Let me know in the comments if you like it or not. If you hate it, then fuck you, and I won't do it again. I'll just keep these spurged out ramblings in the deep recesses of my mind. Draft and develop. Nice story you got there. How does that work? You mark a color revolution narrative and actual. When I say you, I'm saying you observing in the info war and fighting in the info war, but I'm talking about the sovereign alliance. So my core premise, this is the deductive side of me, to be honest about that, I have 2 core premises that I want to disclose. One of them is a beginning state. The other one is an end state. This is how I think. Beginning state. My core foundational premise is that the sovereign alliance is real. Donald Trump in the United States, Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, Russia, Xi Jinping, China, Mohammed bin Salman, Saudi Arabia, Nicolas Maduro, Venezuela, go on and on. You know, some figures we can quibble about, but generally speaking, I think there is a sovereign alliance. That is my premise. My second premise is an end state. I believe the goal of the sovereign alliance is to transition us from a globalist aligned system, a Western hegemony, to a multipolar world. Which is why when I see Donald Trump suffer losses economically or politically, usually to me, I don't frame those as losses, because I don't look for, did Donald Trump have a good day or a good month or a good quarter in the central narrative? I look for, did the story of Donald Trump move the world closer or further from multipolarity? Meaning disentangling the Western hegemony, disentangling globalism. When Donald Trump, here's a core premise here. a core example. And then we'll do an ad, and then we'll get back into the rest of the cipher. But core premise. Donald Trump and Xi Jinping engage in a trade war, right? According to most of the info war and the normie hive mind, Donald Trump and Xi Jinping are enemies. They are on opposite sides of a war. That is their premise. That is the deduction. That is a false premise, in my view. Many Q people, I think, expose themselves as being retarded while talking about the Trump-Xi trade war. Why? Because it directly contradicts the premise in the drops about Donald Trump and Xi Jinping working together against the same enemy. But the trade war is not a contradiction of that premise. The trade war is a confirmation of that premise. This is why, guys, I get the most fired up when I'm told I'm a doomer or anti-Q when I'm the one who understands what they were saying in that specific drop. Or I think I do, right? When it comes to the Sovereign Alliance. Q people will tell you Donald Trump is working with Xi Jinping to destabilize a globalist world order, and Donald Trump is waging an earnest, unironic trade war against Xi Jinping to defeat China. Those two things are contradictions, unless you understand that the end goal of the Sovereign Alliance is not U.S. hegemony, it is multipolarity. Who is most affected by the trade war between the United States and Xi Jinping? It is not China, and it is not the United States. It is everyone in between, namely Europe, which is why I said in 2025, 2024, and 2025, this is a multipolar pincer between Trump and Xi Jinping. The Trump-Putin pincer is kinetic. That is on NATO. The Trump-Xi pincer is economic and financial. That is against the globalist trade system. The collective mandate for globalism has never been lower than it is right now. And despite popular rhetoric to the contrary, despite popular rhetoric in the truth community that that's the doing of Donald Trump, he needed Xi Jinping to forward it. Donald Trump didn't alone lead the charge against globalism. Xi Jinping, by waging a trade war against him, demonstrated proof of concept to the normie hive mind, and more importantly, to global systems of government, that globalism works as long as everyone's getting along, meaning they're locked into the same stasis, they're locked into the same system. It does not get along, or it does not work, if they're opposed to each other, or if a trade war breaks out. So, what's the result of the trade war? The US starts onshoring. China starts onshoring. Those are sovereign moves. Those are anti-collectivist, anti-globalist moves. They grant each other narrative shielding to advance down a multipolar path and away from globalist hegemony. The reason that they need to do that, in my view, instead of just coming right out and saying, hey guys, we're done with this whole globalism thing, we're going to go to a multipolar world order. Well, Xi does actually say that to his people. Trump just says, like, we're taking down globalism, but we're also defending the dollar. He's not defending the dollar. He's destroying the dollar. He's destroying the petrodollar. I don't know if we'll have time for that tonight. Maybe that'll be next show. But Trump and Xi Jinping are waging war on the petrodollar. Iran is actually helping Trump pretty much put the dagger in the heart of the petrodollar. And Trump's not going to come out and say that, because the globalist media, the mainstream media, is going to totally invert that. And honestly, most normies, including in MAGA, are going to buy it because they don't understand what's happening. They see gas going up at the pump. They freak out. They don't get that this is sovereign disentanglement and it's messy. And it needs translation layers. Let me grab a couple more of our sponsors before I get into the rest of this, starting with ourselves at GART. I'm going to see a bunch of you guys in Nashville in just a few days, so I want to hit this before I forget about it. Tickets still available. Virtual tickets still available. Go to badlandsmedia.tv/events.
Patriots, the fight for truth doesn't stop at the screen. It's hitting the road again. Badlands Media is rolling into Nashville on April 9th through 12th. for the next stop on the Great American Restoration Tour. Join your favorite Badlands hosts and like-minded Americans for 3 powerful days. Packed with unfiltered discussions, deep dive panels, and real debate. Hear the raw truth, ask the tough questions. No topic too hot, no question too bold. GART is where our community comes alive. Tickets are on sale now at badlandsmedia.tv/GART, where you can also grab a virtual pass and watch from home. Join us to question narratives and fight for America's future. Nashville's calling. The restoration continues. Get your passes today. See you in Music City.
Nashville. Baby Bright going to be ripping it up. Get him some little boots with tassels or something. Yeah, virtual tickets available. It gets you access to the Telegram group, all that good stuff. Single day tickets are available for any locals who want to come check us out. We will be there this week on Thursday. Looking forward to seeing a lot of you guys. And we are also brought to you by our good friends at Rumble themselves, specifically Rumble Wallet. Here's a little inside scoop that many creators are talking about behind the scenes. It's actually one of the reasons we use Rumble. They made a way to super chat creators so we get paid immediately and without any fees. YouTube and Twitch take up to 50% when you tip creators. This method takes none. That's right, the platform takes 0 fees. We keep 100% of what you send. You can super chat with Bitcoin, Tether USD, or even Tether Gold stablecoins. The tip will show up directly in our Rumble chat, and we'll do our best to read it. All you need to do is download the Rumble wallet on the App Store and send the tips to your favorite creators. You can at wallet.rumble.com, or you can download the app directly from the App Store. What an amazing way to get rid of the middleman and help the creator economy. And shout out to Rumble for embracing disruptive and decentralized, one might even say multipolar technologies. So thank you to Rumble for helping out with what we do here. Okay, back to the shit. You know, the problem, I knew this was going to happen. Problem with doing a show with myself is that I am distracting myself in my mind and going down all these rabbit holes, which is your fault. Because I feel like you guys want me to go down these rabbit holes. And it's consistently getting me off track. So I need everybody to stop. I need myself to stop. And I need to get back on track. Okay? So stop bringing up China and Xi Jinping and all that stuff. Core premise, the sovereign alliance is real. Core end state, a multipolar world. Okay? That's what we're going for. If you reject either of those premises, get out. The door's right there. If you don't think the sovereign alliance is real, but you plan to try to take credit for the theory in a few years, which a lot of people are doing now, then fuck you. If you don't think multipolarity is Donald Trump's end state, then you're stupid. So anyway, focus up, as Yasman says. I need everybody to focus up, especially me. That's the premise. How do we get there? Sovereign disentanglement. What is sovereign disentanglement for? It's not just to get us out of foreign wars and disentangled, literally, from these foreign conflicts, although it is that. It is, in my view, to prevent future administrations from having an easy on-ramp to any of these entanglement operations, be that Western intelligence, the global central banking system, NATO, the EU, whoever gets into the Oval Office again in the future and tries to wield the military-industrial complex. And what do they need to do that? They need a great story. They need the mandate and the collective will or apathy or acquiescence of the American people, right? You can't go to war without the apathy, acquiescence, or straight up buy-in and support of the American people. You just can't. I think a lot of this disentanglement operation is meant to burn out the stories, the on-ramps. These are controlled demolitions of the on-ramps to forever war narratives. Entanglement in South America, we're seeing that with the cartels. Entanglement in Iran, entanglement in Ukraine, entanglement in Taiwan is still to come down the line. We'll probably save those for another show. But that is the end state. That is the goal of sovereign disentanglement. How does it work? Phase 1, draft and develop. Nice story you got there. Mark a color revolution narrative in actual. In Venezuela, man, looks like the common people are really upset with that government down there. And look at that. They already have a character that seems primed to ride that populist, totally not orchestrated wave right into power. And look at that. She is funded by non-governmental organizations that the Sovereign Alliance have been kicking out of their respective nations for the last 10, 20 years, and that Donald Trump is purging from the American system as we speak. Huh. That's interesting. Step 2. Institute COG protocols. Institute devolution. Institute continuity of government protocols. Not from an American perspective. Shout out to Ghost, who documented this in exhaustive detail with Venezuela, that we were entering continuity of government operations a couple of years ago with Venezuela. And now, let's revisit this headline from this past week. U.S. Embassy in Venezuela resumes operations. I know this is a U.S. Embassy, but they're talking about political reconciliation and renormalization. That's the ending of continuity of government protocols. We had Maduro ousted, just like Donald Trump was ousted in 2020. We had our girl Delcy installed to just continue what Maduro was doing. Meanwhile, we got narrative shielding to go after the cartel networks. The same cartel networks that only Ghost is going to tell you Maduro was fighting for the last 10 years while providing intelligence on them, all documented, to Western intelligence, who were not only ignoring him, but were attempting to assassinate him while he was doing it. Step 3. Seize, control, and amplify the narrative. This is from a sovereign perspective. Donald Trump. Let's use Donald Trump as an example. Seize, control, and amplify the narrative. So Donald Trump observes a color revolution kicking up in Venezuela against a sovereign alliance player. He seizes that narrative and amplifies that narrative and says the people of Venezuela must be freed from this evil regime. Right? We all agree there? The people of Venezuela must be freed. Step 4, accelerate the narrative timeline. Scott Besson quote, escalate to de-escalate. What does Donald Trump do after he seizes the narrative? He accelerates the timeline. You know what? We're really sick of watching those Venezuelans down there be all upset about their government. So we're going to help them out. We're going to speed this thing along. We're going to speed it up so fast, we're going to create an obviously fake military technology called the discombobulator that we are going to smile through our shit-eating grin at every reporter who unironically asks us about it after we deploy it. Nobody's going to have any details of what we did. And the end result of the acceleration is going to be a regime change operation. Or rather, the story of the regime change operation, which brings us to phase 2 of sovereign disentanglement. Block and intercept, aka counter coups or the reverse Uno card. Donald Trump marks a color revolution. In effect, by the way, color revolution is specific terminology. It means a revolution that is fake. It is an inorganic revolution funded by outside interests, non-governmental organizations, with the stated goal of destabilizing a nation, fomenting insurrection against the nationalist regime, with the intent of getting collective mandate to swap that regime out. We've seen this all over the map. The Maidan coup, the Orange Revolution in Ukraine is infamous for this. Ukraine was pro-Russian. Eastern Ukraine, the Donbass, was pro-Russian. The CIA implemented a color revolution there that they openly talk about. Victoria Nuland ran point on this. They disclose all this stuff. They create the appearance of a popular uprising against the Russian-aligned leadership. They swap out that aligned leadership. They install a globalist puppet. The people are pissed off. But the surface level narrative is that the people got their regime change operation. So that is what a color revolution is meant to be. So Donald Trump sees a color revolution in the offing down there, and he thinks, well, this is already pretty far along. If we oppose the color revolution publicly, we are going to be called dictators, right? Even many people in MAGA think that Maduro was the bad guy. Some of you are being triggered by me saying that, which is why sovereign disentanglement is as much narrative as it is actual. Because Donald Trump can't tell a lot of people the truth. He just can't. That bothers me, bothers people like John and Chris much more than me. But this is why he can't. Because there are people out there who think Maria Corina Machado is the people's champion. Donald Trump knows that, so he marks the color revolution and says, that's already pretty advanced. That color revolution is already metastasized. So what do? We can't stop it entirely. So let's block and intercept it. Let's hit him with the reverse Uno. How do you do this? Step 1, block the actual color revolution, disarm the actuals. You guys remember early on in Operation Absolute Resolve? We were told in the early hours of this operation that Donald Trump was executing regime change in Venezuela, right? He was open about it. Getting that Maduro regime out of there. And what was the first name that the media collectorate promoted for him? Have you considered, Donald Trump, Maria Corina Machado, aka Hakuna Machado, Hakuna Matata? Have you considered this bitch? And Trump responded, paraphrasing, not only have I considered this bitch, but she ain't it. She just ain't it, fam. Nice girl, though. You know that's when Trump's negging you, is when he calls you a nice guy or a nice girl. Calls Bill Clinton a nice guy all the time, right? I am aware of this bitch, Hakuna Matata, but she ain't it. So they say, well, who then could possibly be the new fake leader of Venezuela if you agree, Donald Trump, that Maduro is evil bad man and the hero of the people, Maria Corina Machado, is not the hero of the people? And he's like, I don't know. Let's focus on the regime change itself. Step 2, accelerate the story of said revolution. Donald Trump doesn't negate the color revolution story. He amplifies it and accelerates it. He encourages the people of Venezuela to take to the streets. He tells them to cheer on the American regime change because, as they have been programmed with anti-Maduro messaging, just like the American mindscape has been programmed with anti-Trump rhetoric, he rides that. He drafts off that, to use a Chris Paul term. He accelerates the story of the revolution. He grants the near identical, immediate, and false resolution. He swaps out Maduro. He gets him to New York. He rug pulls the color revolution. Well, they were supposed to swap out Maduro. The globalist regime was supposed to swap out Maduro. Maria Corina Machado was supposed to swap out Maduro. But Donnie came in and was like, I'm going to take him for you. Let me take him off your hands. I know you wanted to swap him out. You're having some trouble down there. I'm going to swap him out for you. So he swaps him. This places the hegemon into a narrative pincer. It freezes them, which is what I said at the time. During the Venezuela op, and many of you, probably not all of you, read my sovereign disentanglement operation or article in real time during the Venezuela shit. And what did I say? What did I say they were going to do? I said that Trump was placing the globalist regime and Maria Corina Machado into a narrative pincer. They were being frozen. They were being frozen between two choices. Choice one, acquiesce to the regime change narrative that Donald Trump is forwarding on your behalf without knowing his endgame. Many of these people were told by their handlers, we're going to have a color revolution, we're going to have a regime change up, Maduro is going to be swapped out, right? Trump gives them that part of it. So many of them go along with it. They think this is it. We got the regime change. These people are useful idiots, including Machado. That's choice one. Go along with what Trump is doing. You could see Maria, as the sort of face of the color revolution, was doing this in the early going. Cheering for Donald Trump, talking about how strong he was, how great he was, how horrible Maduro was, right? Seems like everything was going according to plan. Choice two. Once you realize, man, you know, Trump just did an interview where he said, I'm not even that bitch. He called me a thought. He said, that hoe over there ain't it. She's not what we're looking for in the new fake leader of Venezuela. So then, if you're part of the regime, you're sitting there going, well, they swapped out the regime that I wanted swapped out, but I was supposed to be the new regime. And Trump is like, nah. Why don't you just sit down? So what's the choice then? Well, you call for another regime change operation. And what did she do? What did this bitch do? Several days later, she called for a new regime change. I don't know if I have this. One. Yeah, I do have it. Nice. Man, what a great article this was that I wrote. So a few days into the operation, when that hoe over there thought, surely I'm going to be the next leader, she realized she was not. And suddenly she wasn't really a big fan of Donald Trump's version of the regime change, saying the following.
Delcy Rodriguez, as you know, is one of the main architects of torture, persecution, corruption, narco trafficking. She's the main ally and liaison with Russia, China, Iran. Certainly not an individual that could be, you know.
Hold up. Wait a minute. Something ain't right. Did you guys hear the country she just mentioned?
With Russia, China, Iran, certainly not an individual that, and liaison with Russia, China, Iran, liaison with Russia, China, Iran, with Russia, China, Iran, Russia, China, Iran, Russia, China, Iran.
Okay, fine. Let's continue.
Certainly not an individual that could be, you know, trusted by international investors, and she's really rejected, repudiated by the Venezuelan people. So,
wow, this bitch. Interesting countries. Maria Corina Machado brings up as an example of who we do not want to align with as part of the globalist regime. Russia, China. You guys know those are sovereign alliance nations, right? You're old enough in the info war to understand that. We've had the talk. Your parents have had the talk with you about Russia and China being the good guys. I know there are a precious few who do not understand that yet, but you know, you can bring a horse to the awakening, but you can't make it not retarded anymore. That third country, weird one. Weird country she throws in there, Iran. Somebody else threw that country into the Sovereign Alliance filter in 2025, when I said, in July of 2025, a new axis was going to be branded by the globalist media. And that new axis was going to be comprised of Russia, China, and Iran. And where's this sovereign disentanglement operation happening right now? So anyway, the point of that wasn't even about Iran. It was to say, from a color revolution playbook perspective, this bitch was getting everything she wanted right up until she wasn't. And by that point, it was too late. So phase 1, draft and develop. Nice story you got there. Phase 2, block and intercept. Reverse Uno, bitch. Gotcha, bitch. Phase 3, invert. Hot swaps and burn cards. Sovereign leader extraction or regime proxy internment. Sounds a little strange, right? Sovereign leader extraction, Nicolas Maduro. Regime proxy internment, Bashir al-Assad. The other country I haven't talked about tonight that I mapped and created this disentanglement cipher around was Syria, which I did predict in advance. And you guys know that if you read my shit. December 2024, I said this was a sovereign disentanglement operation. This was an inversion. Bashir al-Assad was interned. He was extracted and put into Moscow, a sovereign alliance nation. Nicolas Maduro was offered safe harbor in Qatar, a sovereign alliance nation. Sovereign leader extraction, regime proxy internment. Step 2, amplify the cognitive cipher to symbolize the conflict. It's getting a little squirrely. What do I mean by the cognitive cipher here? What do I use most often as a cognitive cipher? The characters. Bashir al-Assad is a cognitive cipher. Nicolas Maduro is a cognitive cipher. The reason I think hot swaps and burn cards are necessary is because the Sovereign Alliance is aware that some leaders have been so damaged by the central narrative and by the narrative arm of the color revolution that they were subjected to, which is always how color revolutions start, narratively. These are ciphers for corruption. They can't remain in place because the collective mind, even in their own nations, will not accept them as a sovereign leader. They have been too damaged by the globalist regime color revolution playbook. So what does Trump do? He amplifies that. Evil man bad Maduro, evil man bad Bashir al-Assad. Swap them out, boys. Leave those globalist bitches over on the bench, right? Double baggers, the lot of them. Leave them over there. We're going to bring our guys in. Burn card. You got to burn Maduro. You got to burn Assad. Give them some nice, cozy retirements. But you got to burn them in the central narrative. You swap in a new regime player. So who's the new regime player in Venezuela? Delcy Rodriguez. Nicolas Maduro's second in command. Who Donald Trump, what did he call her? What was the word that Donald Trump used to define Delcy Rodriguez? Reasonable. Reasonable. Not good. Not sovereign alliance. Not secret white hat. Reasonable. She's just a continuation of the Maduro regime, but more reasonable than that one. Who came into Syria? I think his name's al-Shara now. It was Jolani, an al-Qaeda leader, we're told, who was in favor of LGBTQ plus IA rights as soon as he became the fake president of Syria. And right after doing so, the U.S. Central Command and Russia coordinated on what I referred to at the time in 2024 as the first example of sovereign alliance maneuver defense with the bombing of ISIS targets in Syria. So helpful of that al-Qaeda man to make way for a sovereign alliance bombardment of ISIS targets. So anyway, you amplify the cognitive cipher. You do a hot swap after the burn cards. Codify new agreements and capitulation with new, more reasonable leadership. Well, you know, we would love for like somebody really great to be the leader of Venezuela or Syria, but we just can't have nice things. So this gay al-Qaeda man, or this al-Qaeda man who likes gay people, but is not gay himself, we're told, is more reasonable. I get along quite well with him, Donald Trump says. Delcy Rodriguez, she's still a Maduro, but she's a more reasonable version of that evil bad man. that she worked with forever, and that Maria Corina Machado says is very evil and is cozied up with Russia, China, and Iran. Cement the victory conditions. Donald Trump seizes control of the narrative and says, what are the victory conditions for the regime change operation in Venezuela? Well, a sovereign Venezuela and Pax Americana, a new macro region of responsibility in the Western Hemisphere, and energy realignment, energy sovereignty. I think that's the main narrative in Iran. We're going to run through this afterwards with Iran. Cement the victory conditions. Donald Trump says it's a success in Syria. Syria has opened up the Syrian corridor there. Watch Geopolitics with Ghost and bug him about this for more on that and why the Syrian realignment is actually a good thing. Something Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin were working on with Bashar al-Assad, I would argue, throughout Donald Trump's first term, when we were basically doing these Iranian operations, but in Syria. How quickly we forget that a lot of this warmongering narrative was thrust at Donald Trump in 2018, I believe. Remember when he was bombing airfields in Syria? He was going to hit the Russians. They were warning each other while both hitting ISIS targets because it was a sovereign alliance pincer. Anyway, this is just a bigger version of that, I would say, in Iran. Okay. Draft and develop. Nice story you got there. Block and intercept. Counter coups, reverse Uno, gotcha bitch. Invert, hot swaps, and burn cards. The new leadership. Sovereign alliance leadership. Phase 4. Stabilize and recover. The U.S. State Department literally said for Venezuela, stabilization and economic recovery. Highlight the inherent weakness of a globalist alternative future. Why is that important? Because the color revolution playbook is to swap out the poison regime, the narratively poisoned regime, and cultivate public mandate for alignment with the globalist world order. Let's join the World Economic Forum, the NATO alliance, and the globalist hegemon. Let's join the central banking apparatus. Let's join the World Trade Organization. See how that works? Let's join the deep state. It's the only way through. Look at how hollowed out our country has been by Nicolas Maduro. Definitely not the CIA or the cartels he was warring with for the last 10 years, or the World Trade Organization, or the central banks, the ECB. No, it wasn't any of that. USAID, National Endowment for Democracy, Soros, none of that. Let's join the globalists. Donald Trump is like, hold up. Wait a minute. Something ain't right. Why don't we just be a sovereign nation instead? And who sold that to the Venezuelan people more than any Venezuelan leader? Donald Trump. You guys got a lot of oil there. It's a pretty sweet country, or it could be. Why don't we just kill all those cartel guys? We can help you with that. And then why don't we send our energy companies down there to access your oil, and we'll buy it from you? And, when we do buy it from you, why don't all the proceeds go to you for reconstruction? Highlight the inherent weakness of the globalist alternative future. Tell the story of a new status quo to cement a multipolar framework. Pretty much just went over that part. Accelerate and cement the new actuals. Energy flows, alliances, denuclearization to renuclearization. In the context of Venezuela, energy flows and alliances. Venezuela being brought into the fold of a new Pax Americana, a new Western world, a new Western hegemon. The energy flows makes this sovereign coded, not collectivist. Put the narrative onus, aka mandate cultivation, on the regime to disrupt the stabilization narrative. Trump says, get your own oil, aka you're on your own. Put the onus on the regime change experts to try to cultivate the mandate for a new regime change. It's not going to work in Venezuela right now because the oil is already flowing, right? That's going to be really good for the Venezuelan people if the oil is already flowing. Put the narrative onus on the regime. Phase 5 of 6, translate. This is what I'm most looking forward to, especially in the context of Russia and China. But I think we're getting some trial runs with these smaller nations. Political reconciliation. That term was taken from the Trump State Department, directly applied to Venezuela. Political reconciliation. So what is the translation phase? Change event codification, catharsis. If you guys have been watching me or reading me for any length of time, you know that that's one of my favorite words, catharsis. Right up there with verisimilitude. The movie Inception is the best example of a modern film or story whose core theme is catharsis. This is the heart of what I've called the reverse Hegelian dialectic. The Hegelian dialectic that many have heard of is problem, reaction, solution. But it's actually thesis, antithesis, synthesis. That is what the Hegelian dialectic is. Here's a premise. Here's a response to the premise. Here's the fusion, the synthesis, the end result of the premise and the response to the premise. Proposition, opposition, resolution. Resolution is the most important phase. The Hegelian dialectic works, despite usually being run with lies, if the people believe in the problem, are engineered along the reaction, and accept the solution. The World Trade Center was hit. 3,000 Americans died. The reaction is pandemonium, fear, anger, patriotism. The synthesis is those towelheads over there did it. Let's get them. You don't have to write the whole script. You only have to write the first two phases, and human nature will guide you toward a synthesis. The reason I call the patriot version of this the reverse Hegelian dialectic is because I believe that in the place of synthesis or resolution, they are using a much more powerful psychological weapon. It's similar, but it's called catharsis. And that is an internal, even spiritual or psychological resolution. And I think that comes on the back of truth most strongly. If you can plant an idea and you can get people toward a feeling of catharsis, that they have gone through a transformational event and come out of it changed for the better, if you can codify that feeling within a people, that is not what the deep state is ever able to codify, and that is the key difference between the two dialectics, I think, that are in the offing. The deep state's synthesis, their solution, is a war. This is a pretty simple part of this whole premise. The Sovereign Alliance solution is sovereignty, multipolarity, and peace. The peace that results from a sovereign multipolar world. That is a cathartic change event. But you need the story of the change event, otherwise a catharsis will not be implanted in the collective mind. There needs to be an interaction between the thesis and the antithesis. Maduro, bad. Maduro gone. Delcy Rodriguez, good. Delcy Rodriguez in. Donald Trump codifies the change event. The result, the solution, is energy flowing and political reconciliation. But going back to phase 4, stabilization and economic recovery. What does that lead to? People feel good. What does that translate to? Catharsis. Craft real-time, bicameral narrative layers to capture mandate. And if that is not the most burning bright terms in a sentence, I don't know what else is. craft real-time bicameral narrative layers to capture mandate. I think Donald Trump is doing this right now with Iran. If you are a grab a butt heavy, sit down and watch Lone Survivor kind of guy, this weekend was porn for you. We are messing up those tile heads so bad to get our boys back. I'm going to feel good about however this story goes. If you just think this is a narrative translation, like me, you feel pretty great too, because it's entertaining, and you think you know what the end state's going to be. The narrative layers are bicameral, and they need to capture mandate across different layers of the collective mind. Donald Trump needs the Venezuelan change event to be accepted across layers. He needs MAGA to accept the change event, which they do pretty easily, given that they follow him and trust him. He needs normie liberals to accept the change event, which they actually kind of do, because they were told Nicolas Maduro was evil, bad man in Venezuela by their own globalist apparatus. Which is the advantage of the first phase, draft and develop. Nice story you got there. You mind if I take it? That's the end of that sentence. That's a nice story you got there about the regime change in Venezuela. Do you mind if we borrow it and just tweak it? Why? Why borrow their story? Because they already did all the work. They already laid out the thesis. They already cultivated collective mandate nationally and in the American mind for the thesis. Nicolas Maduro bad. All right, well, let's just run with that. They already did the work. They already cultivated the mandate. We don't want to untangle all that. It takes a lot of energy to untangle those kind of narratives. So you just borrow it. You swap out the solution phase. You borrow the first phase. You might even borrow the second phase of the Hegelian dialectic. You invert the third phase. Sorry to keep going back and forth on these, but I think it's good to just sort of keep the whole framework in your mind. Draft and develop, block and intercept. It's a nice story you got there. We just want to make a couple changes. We just want... I see that bitch over there. I just don't know if she's it. So let's make a couple changes. But you're right. It's an inversion using hot swaps and burn cards. We got our bitch. We're going to put in there. You're going to love her. She's great. And you're totally right that Maduro was evil bad man. And Assad, the worst. Almost as bad as the gay phantom Ayatollah. Not quite as bad. Nobody could be that bad. But close. Stabilize and recover. Self-explanatory. Translate. This is where we're at. Phase 5. Appeal to nationalist layer with peace through strength. Appeal to the pacifist libertarian layer with stabilization. Right? Intellectual dark web types. I don't like regime change. But hey, at least the oil's flowing and that evil bad man's out of there. And the cartels are bad, right? At least they've been wiped out. So you can cultivate stabilization narrative with them. Burn out the intended escalation and stasis narratives. Escalation narrative. We need another regime change. Maria Corina Machado, I showed you that earlier. Asking for more regime change. Regime change harder, daddy. Trump's like, no. We had one regime change. It's not like second breakfast. You can't double regime change a regime change. It's not allowed. The story is too gay. People don't have time for that shit. Especially when you're regime changing Iran right after. Which also gives you a hint as to the cascading effect that sovereign disentanglement has. You can't regime change a regime change. You can't swap out a burn card. These are one-time use. These are instants. Burn out the intended escalation and stasis narratives. What's a stasis narrative? Venezuela. We've been trying to get that oil out of there forever. It's just so unstable. No matter who's in power there, we just can't get a deal done with them. Enter Donald Trump, the deal maker. Whoa, That wasn't so hard. So it's not just a blunting of the escalation narrative. It's a negation of the stasis narrative. No. The oil's already flowing. The corridor in Syria is already open. Pipelines are being constructed there. Disarm the future impetus for color revolutions or false flag ignitions. Why the narrative disarmament? Why the translation? Because if any of these motherfuckers out there try me, if any of these motherfuckers out there try to regime change our regime change, the Sovereign Alliance regime change, they will have no public mandate to do so if we are in the midst of stabilization and economic recovery and political reconciliation. If those two things are in the offing, you can't get the impetus for a color revolution or a false flag ignition without it being obvious. Cultivate cultural reconciliation. Now, far be it from me to tell you guys that sports are fake, although right now it's great timing. The Red Sox are not doing well. You guys know the rules. If my teams are losing, the sport in question is fake until proven real by my teams winning. Who won the World Baseball Classic in 2026? Come on, guys. Who won the World Baseball Classic in 2026? Venezuela? Wait a second. The country that we need to rehabilitate, according to the United States State Department, the country that we need to stabilize, recover, and politically reconcile with, just had the most nationalist, feel-good, bread and circus moment in their history? After the regime change up? Are you trying to tell me the vibes are good? I'm not talking about the World Series. I know a lot of you guys apparently don't watch baseball. The World Baseball Classic is an international tournament in which the Americans lost just last month before the season started. And those little Venezuelans down there won. They beat the US, they beat Japan. I don't know if they went head to head, but they won the tournament. They got their Venezuelan flags flying around. Delcy Rodriguez. The Venezuelans won. Cultivate cultural reconciliation. Otherwise, all totally real. Definitely not scripted in any way. Definitely real. Phase 6, final phase. Scale and converge. Scale and converge sovereign disentanglement. For who? The Sovereign Alliance. Against whom? The invisible enemy. Scale and converge. I call this sovereign radiation. Build the macro story of multipolarity on micro stacking. Take the micro of Syria and the new regime change operation in Syria, the push into multipolarity, sovereign nationalism, and stack that micro with the Venezuelan model. Venezuela has a change event. Venezuela is all about multipolarity now, sovereign radiation, nationalism, energy security, trade deals. Build a macro storyline out of these in service of the worldwide trend of multipolarity and sovereign radiation. Well, it worked in Syria. It seems to be working in Venezuela. Why not Iran? Grant mutual narrative shielding to the Sovereign Alliance. Sovereign Alliance gets to do deals with the new leadership of X country because now they're not the same as the old leadership. So you've got narrative shielding. It's a total reset. Finally, multipolar reconstruction. Tear down the old to build the new. Anytime you hear Donald Trump right now talking about Venezuela, talking about Syria, what's he talking about? Building. abundance, power to the people, money to the people, energy to the people, new deals, reasonable transactions. So that's the purpose of it. So I'm going to run through these, hopefully quicker, in the context of Iran, and then we're going to get out of here. All right. Iran is incomplete, okay? I laid out the sovereign disentanglement cipher as an experiment to see if you guys think the same thing could be playing out with Iran. Okay, phase one. First of all, premise. Who is the sovereign disentanglement in Iran for? Sovereign alliance. Who is it against? The invisible enemy. Who is Donald Trump threatening the most in the current narrative? Besides Iran? Who is Donald Trump threatening the most besides Iran? I am strongly considering pulling out of NATO, Donald Trump says this week. Who does he reference in this article? He calls NATO a paper tiger, and he says, Vladimir Putin knows this too. It's not China. China narrative is fake news. You guys have taken the cheese on China. But I'm probably going to have to do a whole other show on how Iran fits into the Sovereign Alliance playbook, which maybe that'll be a good theme for my next solo episode if I do another one. Going back to the template. Who's it for? Sovereign Alliance. Who's it against? Invisible enemy. Phase one, draft and develop. Nice story you got there. Do you guys remember the story throughout 2025 and into 2026 about a people's revolution in Iran and how they were rising up against the Ayatollah? Did you remember any of the TV characters that were endorsing the revolution besides Donald Trump? Well, it was the National Endowment for Democracy, the World Economic Forum, the European Union, and NATO were endorsing the people's uprising in Iran. So strange. Nice story you got there. Donald Trump, mark the color revolution in Iran. Institute continuity of government protocols. If you guys have been listening to Ghost, hint, hint, this is not a theory. The Iranian government instituted continuity of government protocols in 2025 to, quote, decentralize their command and control structure. So, Iranian devolution, which is Ghost has been writing about since they did it. Mark a color revolution. Got that in Iran. Institute COG protocols. Well, we got that in Iran. Seize, control, and amplify the narrative of the color revolution. Donald Trump. The Iranian regime is bad. We need regime change. Accelerate the narrative timeline. Escalate to de-escalate. We love your revolution so much. We're going to do it for you. Now that the leadership is decentralized and impossible to defeat, we are going to regime change them for you. Block and intercept. Counter coups and reverse Uno. Block the actual color revolution. Disarm the actuals. Blitzkrieg Iran. Blitzkrieg selected targets in Iran. And what does Trump do? The first day that we're told these operations, Operation Epic Fury, is happening, he taunts, in my mind, in my view, he taunts the color revolutionists by telling them, now's your chance, guys. Look it. We basically totally obliterated and discombobulated the regime that is still fighting us, supposedly, a month later and indefinitely from now on until we're done with the story. But other than that, they're totally obliterated. There was fierce firefighting all night. We staged the most daring rescue that's ever been staged in the history of rescues, borrowing from the movie plots of two subpar 2000s movies, although Lone Survivor is better than Behind Enemy Lines. But other than that, they're totally obliterated that the IRGC has nothing. There's nothing going on. I mean, we need secret operations and Delta Force, constant bombing operations. But other than that, totally, we've won this 37 times. There's no, the leaders are all dead except for all the ones who aren't dead. Block the actual color revolution. Besides all of that, Iranian people, you should take your government back. Have they done that? How are they going to do that? Accelerate the story of the revolution. Grant a near identical, immediate, and false resolution. So instead of just swapping out Maduro, this is like, you know how many Ayatollahs we've taken out in the last 3 weeks? So many, Donald Trump can't even name them. He doesn't even know. He's flippant with the number of Ayatollahs that are being taken out. Place the hegemon into a narrative pincer. Now, the hegemon in this context might be Israel, it might be the EU, it might be NATO. Do they seem eager for what Trump is doing? Or a little hesitant? Do they seem to be on the same page as Donald Trump when it comes to this stuff? Which is weird, right? Because we were told the Israelis and NATO were totally on board with the People's Revolution in Iran. Why wouldn't they be on board with Trump's escalation of it? Now, the Israelis are playing a different game, narratively. I'll leave the untangling of that to Ghost. But they're not always in agreement with Donald Trump's narrative deployments. NATO is firmly in disagreement with him, which is an interesting marker. And that's all these are intended to be. Invert hot swaps and burn cards. Sovereign leader extraction or regime proxy internment. Amplify the cognitive cipher to symbolize the conflict. Codify the new agreements with a new, more reasonable leadership. Cement the victory conditions. What has Donald Trump been doing? He's talking about phantom gay Ayatollahs who may or may not be real, but definitely are probably gay if they are real, fake, and gay. I don't know how much more clear he can be. Swapping out phantom gay Ayatollahs, replacing them with Ayatollahs he admits to the media he can't even name, but that he assures are much more reasonable than the phantom gay Ayatollah that has been replaced. Cement victory conditions. The opening of the Strait of Hormuz. The swap out of the phantom gay Ayatollah and his grandfather or whatever, dad. The implementation and deal making with a new Iranian regime. And denuclearization, which we were told, guys, we were told the denuclearization happened in 2025 as part of Operation Epic Fury. Sorry, Midnight Hammer. Get them all confused. That's the first one. This is the threequel. So it's denuclearized, we're told. It's more reasonable now. And we had the change event. Hot swaps and burn cards. I mean, to me, we're 3 for 3 so far in Iran. Draft and develop, block and intercept, invert, stabilize and recover. We are not here yet. But let's watch the coming months. Stabilization and economic recovery highlight the inherent weakness of a globalist alternative future. Is Iran perhaps going to come out of this whole narrative with a little bit more sovereign coding? Are they going to be weaker on the world stage or much stronger? I would argue the inverse of what most in this community would argue. I think the story of Iran is that they're going to be much stronger after this. And I think Donald Trump is going to codify that narrative and save face because he's going to make deals with that new, stronger, more sovereign, more reasonable Iran that he helped codify. Is that good for NATO or bad for NATO? Is it good for the EU or bad for the EU? Who is the invisible enemy? Is it really the Iranian regime or is it somebody else? Tell the story of the new status quo to cement a multipolar framework. Is there going to be a new macro region of responsibility in the Middle East, in the Gulf states that we've been talking about on Badlands Media for a while? Cemented by a combination of Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, and Iran. and a new Abraham Accords? Is that the end state? What would that look like? What would the result of such a region of responsibility or an accords be? Stabilization and economic recovery. Accelerate and cement the new actuals. Energy flows, alliances, denuclearization to renuclearization. This is a dialectic I've been tracking for some time. For any of you who've been following my writing, the Amerigeddon Timeline War series used to be called Weapons of the Future. I changed that name because it didn't really make sense. It's called the Timeline War now. But I wrote the Amerigeddon article in 2024. It's all about denuclearization as a narrative to a renuclearization actual. Well, who is working with the Iranian regime that's just been bombed to smithereens, except for the phantom gay ones and the reasonable ones? We didn't bomb the reasonable ones. Those are still left. Russia and China have been working with Iran over the last 5 years on a civil nuclear energy program. What did Donald Trump say in 2025 when it came to his only caveat toward in terms of the denuclearization narrative of Iran? They can't have nukes for any reason, right? They can't have full enrichment for any reason, right? They can't have any nuclear. Well, I mean, if it's a civil nuclear program, maybe we could allow that. What is Russia and China working with Iran on for the last several years? A civil nuclear energy program. I think we might be 4 for 4, even though on narrative time, we are not in phase 4 yet. But the choice to know that is yours. As Donald Trump himself posted in 2025, the definition of intelligence is the ability to predict the future. Let's see what happens. Is Iran not going to be blown to smithereens? Are they actually, no matter how bombastic the narrative is on Monday and Tuesday, I will argue that the end state of this, if this template holds, is that we're going to have a renewed, sovereign, powerful, nuclear energy Iran in the Middle East, helping to stabilize it and facilitating energy flows to their once enemies. Put the narrative onus on the regime to disrupt. Go get your oil, aka you're on your own. Kind of weird thing for Donald Trump to say to our greatest allies, huh? NATO, the EU, the World War II allies, Israel. Go get your own motherfuckers. You start a war with Iran after I'm done finishing the fake one. That's my handicapping. Phase 5, if we get there. Translate. Political reconciliation. Can we have political reconciliation with Iran? Can we have catharsis? Can we have the codification of the change event? If all the phantom gay ayatollahs are gone and they can't hurt us anymore, could we have an Iran that returns more to a 1978 version of Iran? Could that happen over time? Could that start with new trade deals, with new energy deals? Could that start with the signing of a new Abraham Accords? Craft a real-time bicameral layer to capture mandate. Appeal to the nationalist layer with peace through strength. We bombed the shit out of those filthy savages. That's what Donald Trump's saying. We had reruns of Behind Enemy Lines, Top Gun Maverick, Lone Survivor. What more do you want? How many movies do you want us to do here? Because we'll do them all. Peace through strength. Appeal to the pacifist and libertarian layer with stabilization. Well, you know, stocks got a little wacky in 2026. But hey, everybody's onshoring energy production now. The permit restarts in the US are accelerating even off the coast of California via executive order. And Donald Trump is using the National Defense, I think it's Defense Stabilization Act. You can fact check me on that. Some kind of stabilization act. You know how it goes. John knows that kind of nerdy shit. He's using defense acts national defense, national security, in order to force the energy golden age acceleration domestically in the US using Iran as a jumping off point. We're getting more stabilized for the future because the Iranian not. Imagine what happens with them. You know what's been happening while Iran has been being blitzed? They're settling in yuan, not US dollars. Is it good or bad for Iran long term to not have to settle all of its trade in US dollars? It is good. Stabilization. Burn out the intended escalation and stasis narratives. Escalation. Israel. Are you going to stop fucking around over there if we take away every narrative onus, every narrative on-ramp that you have to attack Iran? If every phantom gay Ayatollah that keeps every Jew up at night sweating bullets is gone, according to the central narrative, replaced by reasonable phantom gay Ayatollahs, will that not assuage your fears? I think it will. And a stasis narrative. I often refer to the Middle East as the land's peace forgot. Well, if we have a change event, and if things are looking pretty stable over there, and if they sign the Abraham Accords, and if the Gulf states and Saudi Arabia are cool with them, and if even Israel, we are told, becomes cool with them, have we avoided the stasis narrative of the forever war? Perhaps. Disarm the future impetus for color revolution or false flag ignition. Basically the same point there. Cultivate cultural reconciliation. Iran is not leading the charge on this, but you guys are beginning to see some hints as to a Middle Eastern reconciliation tour in American culture. And if you don't think that is happening, the regime does think that's happening. Foreign investments in Paramount Warner Brothers deal flagged by Democratic senators in FCC letter. Why? The senators called for a full review of investments from Middle Eastern sovereign wealth funds and Tencent, Chinese, which they say could influence editorial decisions at news outlets owned by the combined company. So the biggest entertainment conglomerates in the world are being owned or assisted by Middle Eastern sovereign wealth funds. That looks like the beginnings of cultural reconciliation to me. They're literally going to buy up all the gay American studios. With the phantom gay Ayatollahs gone, as long as those ones are gone, the reasonable Ayatollahs and reasonable other towel heads in the region are buying up the largest video game developers in the West, the largest movie studios in the West, streaming platforms, and they are ripping out all the gay shit, root and stem. All the woke shit is getting ripped out by Saudi wealth funds. And they're making base cool shit again. They're just starting to. We're still a ways away from that. And yeah, in case anybody's wondering, I would immediately sell the Swordpunk IP, movie IP, to a Saudi prince. Immediately. I don't even have to take a meeting. Consider it done. Because I am so confident that it will not be bastardized by a gay Ayatollah that I'm willing to just do that on the spot. Phase 6. I lost my little share thingy. You guys haven't stared at this long enough. Phase 6, scale and converge sovereign radiation. Build a macro story of multipolarity on the micro stacking. Syria, Venezuela, Iran. Who's next, motherfuckers? You guys see Zelensky scrambling around there in the central narrative the last couple weeks? Talking about how he's ready to make a deal. What did he say about that deal? Where could this template scale and converge to? Do you guys know where it could converge to? Trump pressuring Ukraine to cede territory to Russia, according to Zelensky? What? That's crazy. You're telling me that Donald Trump is telling Ukraine to give up the Donbass, which was the deal offered by Vladimir Putin in the first place. So scale and converge, to me, is about sovereign radiation. If, then. If here, why not there? Mirror sovereign disentanglement template across the battle space. Russia started it with Ukraine. Russia and the US continued it with Syria. The US accelerated it with Venezuela. The US is taking Iran from a sovereign disentanglement perspective. Russia's going to finish Ukraine. And yes, I do believe, although they've been blue ballsing us for a long time, Taiwanese blue balls, a memoir of Burning Bright. China has been blue ballsing us. But they're going to go in there. I believe it. I believe these flirtations were not for nothing, and that we will get a fake war in Taiwan. And many OSINT specialists in the info war will tell you about porcupine strategy and all that shit. Sonic the Hedgehog analogies and all kinds of stuff about what's really going on according to government-released satellite imagery from fake wars in Taiwan that we will be told about. So, sovereign radiation, scale and converge. One more time to run through it. I think this applies to Venezuela. I think it's going to apply to Iran. But feel free to freak the fuck out based on whatever Donald Trump tweets in his latest bender. And I'm having a great time watching it. It's good stuff. Don't get me wrong. If you are using inductive reasoning and not deductive reasoning. Draft and develop. Nice little story you got there. Block and intercept. Reverse Uno. Gotcha, bitch. Invert. Hot swaps and burn cards. Stabilize and recover. Translate. Political reconciliation. Scale and converge. Sovereign radiation. That is sovereign disentanglement. That's what happened in Syria. That's what happened in Venezuela. That's what's happening in Iran. That's what's happening in Ukraine. That's what's going to happen in Taiwan. The result is multipolarity, sovereign radiation, and the increasing organic, natural, cascading decline of the globalist structure. How is the EU doing right now? How is the UK doing? How is NATO doing? How are they feeling right now? How's California doing? $8 gas. California. Why? Why is California $8 gas? Well, you're probably $4, wherever you are. Because they don't have national energy policies. They have anti-national energy policies. California actually imports a lot of its energy from Asia. Asia is now rationing its energy as a result of the untangling of the Iranian knot. They are withdrawing inward. California projected outward. So they're getting fucked. We might see sovereign disentanglement in California because it's a foreign country. So anyway, let me know what you guys think of that. Let me know what you thought of this format. If it was good, if it was boring, if it was some mix of the two. There's plenty more stuff I could go into, but I am not going to at this point because I don't want this to go beyond the 3-hour mark. I would highly encourage you to check out Sovereign Disentanglement, burningbright.substack.com. Read all about this from January. I do not go back and retroactively edit my articles to seem more right than I was at the time. There's probably some stuff in there that's stupid. But, you know, the macro, the patterns. And anyway, is there any hint that the media is starting to pick up on some of the stuff we talked about tonight? Well, look at this. Look at this. Iran's new regime looks much the same, only harsher. Now, who has been saying the new regime will look an awful lot like the old regime? You guys know who's been saying that? Obviously, it's me. A new regime that looks like the old regime. Weird. Almost like there was no regime change. Are there any other places we might see this in? Trump signals potential military action coming against Cuba. Well, certainly, you guys don't think that we would swap out a Cuban regime but keep it largely unchanged, right? Like, let's not get carried away, right? We might do Iran and Venezuela, but the buck stops with Cuba, right? Certainly, if we swap out a regime in Cuba, we would not replace them with, like, I don't know, what's like the most cartoonish version of a non-regime change you could do in Cuba? It'd be like replacing them with a Castro or something, right? Like keeping a Castro in power. And in revolutionary statement, Fidel Castro's grandson embraces capitalism with sovereignty. What is awkward for Democrats and their left-wing activist network of politicians and dark money-funded nonprofits is that the latest CNN interview with Fidel Castro's grandson shattered years of left-wing America's weird obsession with Cuban communism. Sandro Castro told CNN that he would welcome a deal with President Trump and said many on the island want capitalism with sovereignty. There are many people in Cuba that think in a capitalistic way. I think the majority of Cubans want to be capitalist, not communist. Guys, if Donald Trump de facto installs Fidel Castro's grandson as the Cuban leader we make sovereign deals with, will you shut up about everything being real? Or is that still what was obviously going to happen the whole time? Like, they can only make it so obvious. And replacing the Cuban communist regime with a Castro who is based and sovereign alliance aligned, I don't know how much further they can go to get people on board. But I look forward to the next Cuban Missile Crisis rerun, which will bring Russia back into the narrative and everybody freaking out that, that's all going to get super crazy. But anyway, next week, I'm going to be in Nashville. So there will not be an episode of The Narrative. Hope to see many of you there. The week after that, I'm going to have CanCon on the show, I believe. We're going to talk about both elections, but not in the gay way. National mandate, the storylines there. We're going to talk about the military when it comes to the Middle East and how his psyche has changed regarding some of this stuff. And then I'm probably going to do a solo section and we'll finish up some of the notes I had here. Because the disentanglement, I think the real disentanglement is not just against NATO and the globalists. I think it's against the petrodollar. And I think we got a bunch of hints over the last couple of weeks that that's exactly what's in the offing. I gathered some stuff up to go through a lot of that, but this will be a 6-hour show if we do it, and only 7 of you really want that. For a preview of that, go to burningbright.substack.com. Check out the recent Iran series I've been writing. Donald Trump's energy war is one. I think this war is largely about an energy reset and a currency reset. And my most recent feature that came out today, when you watch this, is called A Naked Empire of Paper Tigers on the Impending Collapse of the New World Order. A lot of rave reviews of this one. Appreciate you guys subscribing over there. It's all free, as always, but any support anybody chooses to provide is appreciated. These the Substack really sort of acts as a incubator of a lot of what I end up rambling about, or what I end up rambling about sometimes ends up as an incubator for what I write about. And yes, Jess, before I get to rants, I will thank another of our sponsors. And next up again is from Rumble, and that is our friends at 1775 Coffee. Still haven't tried it? Now's your shot. The 1775 starter kit just dropped, only 1,000 units. You're getting the bold dark roast that hits hard, the smooth medium roast, and the Vitality mushroom coffee for clean energy and laser focus with no crash. All single origin, small batch, toxin-free, and mold-free, which is great because I don't like drinking mold. So I'm a big fan of them being like, we don't do that. Plus, you're also getting a gold spoon clip because freedom isn't scooped with a plastic frother strong enough. Oh, it's not scooped with plastic. And then another sentence is a frother strong enough to stir up your coffee and your mother-in-law's opinions, and a black 1775 tumbler. $170 worth of coffee and gear, yours for $99. This is for the ones who've been watching 1775 blow up on Rumble, wondering if it's actually worth it. Spoiler, it is. Go to 1775coffee.com/studio, grab your starter kit before they're gone. Bold beans, clean fuel, and morning routine that stands for something, just like Rumble does. Thank you to 1775 Coffee and Rumble. Thank you, guys. I'll run through these rants. I did have a boost from last week from ADC, who said, for formulating the Middle Eastern Kobayashi Maru analogy, F that every Rabobank guy. Yeah, you guys probably saw me ranting about guy out of Rabobank saying, you know, I think there's a Kobayashi Maru going on with Donald Trump and Iran. It's like, motherfucker, I wrote that in 2023, you piece of shit. And I will not apologize for it. Rants, Tom Terrific, $25 for the cause. Thank you, Tom. Much appreciated. Lee Walden, talking to yourself is one thing. It's who's responding that sets the narrative. That's a dialectic. You've been paying attention, Lee Walden. And you were paying attention ahead of time because you knew what was going to happen. So, anyway. Final demand. I believe we aren't fighting just Iran. It's a good portion of the globalist deep state military. Trump promised to obliterate the deep state. Is this the kinetic narrative op that fulfills that promise? How kinetic you think it is up to you. I do not know. I'm obviously making light of the pilot thing. I don't know. Maybe that all happened. Maybe it did. But I have my doubts. I think most people are going to believe it happened, and that's fine. Kind of like makes the story more amplified. But I think largely the disentanglement is narrative. The actual, I think, is more about energy and currency, which, again, I'll do that in a separate episode. But or you can go to my Substack and read about it. But that's what I think the real disentanglement is. Remember, the reason Trump calls NATO a paper tiger is because there is no actual battle to be had with the true globalist enemy. The real battle is over energy and currency and the collective mind, which is what the narrative is about. But I think the real pain that we're feeling, right? The real pain of gas pumps, consumer price index going to go up, inflation, money printing, probably we're due for that in the spring. There's a real boil the frog going on. It's just, I think, accelerating with Europe. Not really here as much. So, yeah, I think there's real operations, but I do not think they are kinetic at this stage. I think the kinetic operations happened some time ago, but I'm also crazy. Keith O'Higgins, I think you should add a Boston mob theme to your outline. Like, that's a real nice story you have there. It would be a real shame if something happened to your narrative. Catch my drift? Yeah, I kind of was going in that direction. Be a shame if somebody took it. Final demand. BB for press secretary is obviously a narrative shielding pincer, bicameral multipolar hegemon reconstruction that grants narrative stasis. Duh. Great show, BB. I'm glad somebody was paying attention. I was beginning to think I was speaking into the void. And Keith O'Higgins, wouldn't it be wild if the Iranians had the Samson option and not Israel? That would be wild. Would indeed be wild. All right, guys. That's all I got for you. Getting out of here in like a clean 3 hours, which is nice. I guess there's no Q after hours tonight because I don't see it on the docket. But I don't know what the deal is with that, but I'm sure they'll be back at it after Nashville or at Nashville. Who knows? Thanks for watching, guys. Again, give me some feedback. You can be a dick if you want. I will be a dick back, but that's what I do. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed that. I'm not used to doing the solo thing. And obviously I prepared way too much stuff and thought I was going to get through it in 2 hours, and I got through less than half of what I wanted to in 3 hours, which I should have expected. See some of you next week in Nashville. See a bunch of you on the interwebs. I'll be back at The Narrative in 2 weeks. Otherwise, the war is a story. The story is a war. It is never more important to understand what that means and that it is literal than right now. You are going to wake up tomorrow and you are going to look at your feed and one of you is going to freak the fuck out. One of you is going to freak the fuck out because it's going to say something crazy. You're going to be like, this sovereign disentanglement is still happening. Maybe. I don't know. I think. Relax. Just calm down. Okay? Anyway, I'll see you guys some other time. Peace.
We were sleeping.